6 months after the 9/11 terror attacks, a man named Mark Burnett came to see Donald Trump with an idea. He'd just finished producing a popular primetime TV show called Survivor, and he wanted to remake it, only this time, instead of being set in the jungle, it would be set in the boardroom. And he was wondering if Donald Trump would be interested in being one of the hosts. Trump thought it over for a while before agreeing. A couple of years later, the debut episode of The Apprentice went to air.
New York, my city, where the wheels of the global economy never stop turning.
More than 20 million people tuned in on average every week to see contestants face off in various business-related challenges. But the real star was Donald Trump. NBC quickly shelved plans to have rotating hosts and built the entire show around him. In the intro to the very first episode, Trump invoked his comeback of a few years earlier.
I was seriously in trouble. I was billions of dollars in debt. But I fought back and I won. Big league. And as the master, I want to pass along my knowledge to somebody else. I'm looking for The Apprentice.
The Apprentice was one of the best things that ever happened to him. Over the 14 seasons he was host, Trump made close to $500 million from his salary, licensing, and other residuals. And it did wonders for his reputation. By the 2000s, real estate had been overtaken in the cool stakes by industries like tech. Trump, by virtue of his personality, was partly immune to that effect. But by beaming him into millions of homes every week, Trump was also reminding people that he was a successful businessman with a lifestyle worth emulating. The Apprentice was a major step in the transformation of Trump, from being primarily a real estate developer to being someone whose main business was selling his own name.
You seize opportunity. You get a hit TV show, and the show wasn't even on that long, and you're thinking fragrance, board game, books, suits, and you get all that out there. I've been on the air for 11, coming up on 12 years, not one product.
Most of these products failed, some after a few years, others almost immediately. But that was almost beside the point. They were all possible because of the success of The Apprentice. It was 2009, and Trump was about to release his latest book, Think Like a Champion. The US was facing major upheaval on two fronts. The collapse of the investment bank Lehman Brothers triggered a wholesale financial meltdown and recession. And just months after, the country elected its first ever non-white president. The combination of those two seismic events was fundamentally altering the country's politics. For Donald Trump, who by now was a Republican again, this transformation looked like bad news. In 2010, he was introduced to the director of a documentary about the financial crisis. His name was Steve Bannon. Bannon was a microcosm of the evolution of conservative politics. He'd been an investment banker for Goldman Sachs. From there, he pivoted into media, where he ended up becoming the executive chairman of Breitbart News, a bomb-throwing right-wing news organization. At Trump's luxury penthouse apartment atop the tower that bore his name, the two men talked about how China was ripping off the United States. It was just like Trump's old diatribes against Japan, updated for a new age and a new rival.
In the United States, a majority of Americans say the country is on the wrong track, and no segment of the electorate is more frustrated with the U.S. government and President Barack Obama than the folks driving the Tea Party movement.
The Tea Party is hard to define because it doesn't want to be. It's anti-big government, anti-liberal, anti-Barack Obama. But after that, the lines blur.
The Tea Party movement was partly inspired by a backlash to Barack Obama, but it was also an eruption of anger about issues that had been bubbling up under the surface for years: federal bailouts, corporate welfare, and government overreach. Dozens of Tea Party activists ran against establishment Republicans in primaries, and some even went on to become senators and members of Congress. Despite the massive amounts of energy generated by the Tea Party movement and major gains in the 2010 midterms, Republicans didn't have a candidate who could channel that energy. Lots of Republicans wanted to vote for someone who wasn't afraid to throw a punch, someone they knew and liked, and someone who wasn't afraid to say some pretty outrageous things. Who would be their champion?
So big. Thank you very much, everybody.
In early 2011, Trump spoke at CPAC, a high-profile Republican conference. He walked out to the ABBA song Money, 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 called Republican candidates losers, quoted a magazine story about what a great entrepreneur he was, and promised to repeal Obamacare. It was classic Trump. What was new, at least for him, was his claim that Obama came out of nowhere.
Our current president came out of nowhere.
If the audience didn't take the bait, he'd probably have dropped it, but they bit. Trump gave the most popular speech of the entire conference. Asking questions about where Obama was born was a strategy modeled directly on his campaign against the Central Park Five more than 20 years earlier. Trump happily exploited people's racial biases because doing so helped generate publicity.
I want him to show his birth certificate. There's something on that birth certificate that he doesn't like.
Oh my God.
Thanks mainly to the birther claims, Trump surged to the top of early polls for the 2012 Republican presidential nomination. In a crowded field full of eccentric candidates, Trump applied the skills he'd learned from years in the bare-knuckle world of Manhattan real estate. Eventually, Obama was forced to produce his long-form birth certificate.
And just to be clear, I know where my birth certificate is, but a lot of people don't.
A few weeks later, he got his revenge when he roasted Trump at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
No one is prouder to put this birth certificate matter to rest than the Donald. And that's because he can finally get back to focusing on the issues that matter. Like, did we fake the moon landing?
Trump responded to the humiliation by pulling out of the race. In the end, despite the excitement created by candidates who were on board with the Tea Party's agenda, the Republican nomination was won by Mitt Romney, a polite Mormon who'd founded a private equity firm. But Romney couldn't inspire enough Republicans to vote for him in the general election. Everyone expected Trump's interest in politics to fade, and for him to move on to other interests. If anything, his interest deepened. To people who made a career out of following Trump, it actually wasn't a surprise. Trump had a short attention span for things he didn't really care about. But when it came to things he did care about, like the West Side rail yards, he could be very determined. During this time, America was changing. News had become more and more polarized, and a spate of alternative news sources had begun popping up, such as Breitbart News. Trump took notice of the void that these organizations were filling and had begun really pushing the same narratives on his now blossoming Twitter account. Large swaths of the country were becoming red-pilled, and so was the Republican Party. Republicans won big in the 2014 midterms, winning the Senate and expanding their majority in the House. And they'd won by talking about crime, border security, and the threat from countries like China. Pollsters couldn't remember the last time so many candidates won despite having net negative approval ratings. Trump had always believed he could become president, but he'd never had the support from a major party he needed to actually win. Suddenly, the stars were aligning. Americans, especially Republicans, were willing to listen to increasingly radical solutions to the problems they faced. But no one on either side of the political aisle had Trump's charisma or name recognition. If he could put it together, it could be a potent combination. On June 16, 2015, Donald Trump descended down an escalator at Trump Tower, with his wife Melania by his side and Neil Young's Rockin' in the Free World playing and Change the World.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
He opened his speech by lamenting that the United States didn't have victories anymore. The country had become a dumping ground for everyone's problems. Billions of dollars had been spent on overseas wars with nothing to show for it except dead and maimed soldiers. The economy was weak and being made weaker by Obamacare and trade deals that were offshoring jobs to places like China and Mexico. And Republicans weren't serious about tackling the problems facing the nation. Trump's candidacy was a comeback narrative. He engineered one of the most famous comebacks in history. He could do the same for his country. The mainstream media, which had never really taken him seriously, treated Trump's speech largely as a joke.
I will personally write you a campaign check now.
Does anybody seriously think that Donald Trump is serious about running for president?
But his campaign wasn't a joke. In fact, Trump had been planning it for months. He'd hired a staff and kept guys like Stone and Bannon close. Contrary to the public perception of Trump as scattered, they maintained a laser-like focus on issues where they knew that Trump's views resonated with voters, like trade and immigration. A few months before Trump went down the escalator, his advisors suggested that he start talking about a physical wall on the US border with Mexico. They actually intended it mostly as a metaphor that would remind him to talk about immigration, but Trump took it literally, and his instincts were correct. The wall became one of the most enduring images of his entire presidential campaign, and it ensured that Trump was always taken seriously on immigration. The mainstream media might have treated Trump as a joke, but Republican leaders didn't. Trump was their worst nightmare. Remember, they wanted to extend an olive branch to minority voters. Meanwhile, Trump was on stage talking about how Mexican immigrants were rapists. But establishment Republicans would soon learn that they couldn't do anything to stop him. The 2016 Republican primaries became the Trump show.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
He turned politics into must-watch TV, and voters loved it.
He hit my hands. Nobody has ever hit my hands. I've never heard of this one. Look at